Well, wonderful. Good evening. And I think a particular thanks because you've come in from the rare, beautiful evening for those of you in person here in Edinburgh. So a big thank you for coming. And for the people online, don't know what your weather's like and hope it is fairly good as it is currently in Edinburgh. So yeah, my name's Kay. I am here as Research Director of Moray House School of Education, and my role is both to be extremely welcoming and also to chair tonight's session. So that is my role, and it is really wonderful being with you. You will have realized that this is a very sort of special time for Moray House. You may have been part of that special time and certainly are by being here today. And it's part of this 175th year anniversary. It's actually hard to say that. That's kind of exciting. That Moray House has been evolving and developing. And if you look at its history, it is just extraordinary to think what a difference it has made in individual practitioners' lives who've then gone on to do marvelous work out in the field, from the research, from the knowledge exchange. So it's a fascinating time to be in Moray House. It's a wonderful time to look back and appreciate everything that people have done and contributed. And tonight to have a bit of stimulation, I think, in terms of where we might go in the future as well. So we have two speakers today. So first we have Will Smith, and Will joined Moray House in 2018. And a senior lecturer in education and international development. I know Will particularly as the director of internationalization for the school and leads the comparative education and international development community. He may say more, but it is amazing if you look at his background. Please do look at his web profile, but over 20 years experience as well, researching education and working on an international and global level with UNESCO and other organizations like the OECD. So he's coming to us with that expertise, particularly to look at the broad social benefits of education, and also looking at the impact of education and how it's shaped by local and national contexts. So that's only the first one. Then second, we have Sarah McGeown, who is Professor of Literacy here at Moray House. And did you know you joined in 2013? Got it all written down. As you will find out much more, but Sarah works very closely with children, young people, practitioners, policymakers, community, national organizations. And if you've gathered from that, she's a passionate advocate in terms of partnerships, which I think you'll be focusing and leading us through that in terms of some of the partnerships in Moray House, certainly some ones you've been really involved in, and also, again, stimulating us to look ahead in terms of the possibilities. So it's a significant milestone for Moray House. It's a wonderful occasion that we've got not one, but two speakers. So I'm shortly going to hold over to them. Just to say that they have been told they have 25 minutes each. Then we'll have a lovely amount of time, if we so desire, for discussion and questions. We very much want to hear also for the people who have joined us online, and I believe the chat. And eventually you can even come onto our big screen should you want to share and vocalize or otherwise express what you want to share in the questions and discussions. There is no fire drill, right? So if there is a fire, we will leave by the fire exits and organize ourselves. For you to know that it is being recorded today. Yeah, so both the presentations and the Q&A, just so that you're aware of it. And for those of people who are in person, you might want to check that your mobile is on silent or something appropriate. I was just at a meeting and it went off when the minister was talking. Anyway, so if you want to check your mobile, just to make sure that it is on silent or something like that. So I think with that, anything else you want me to say, Pauline? No? I get to hand over to Will. Thank you, Will. Maybe a clap to start. Yeah?
Excellent. Well, thank you, Kay, for the introductions, and welcome, everybody. Really excited to be here as we celebrate 175 years of Moray House history. So I'm going to get us started. Slide. And Sarah and I have broken this into two parts. I'm going to be looking backwards, talking about kind of the history of educational expansion, a little bit globally, a little bit in Scotland. I'll talk about the effects of education on society and what education can do with quite a positive message. And then I'll talk about how what we can do doesn't always mean education does do that the context in which we're talking about is quite important to consider. All right, so let's start with the expansion of education. So here we see basically from 1850 on, the last 175 years of education globally. And we see in 1850, about 1 out of every 5 school-age children attended school at some level. Over 175 years, we've gone from about 1 out of 5 to over 4 out of 5. So we are not quite at universal education. We've seen massive growth in schooling globally, which also means, unfortunately, we have about 250 million individuals still out of school, but amazing growth in education. And historically, on the right side, we can see that this has really gone through 3 phases. Right, we've got elite education. This is thinking back even before 1850, where elite education used to be for religious leaders, or it used to be for the nobility, right? So very specific groups of privileged individuals in society that were able to get education. And that went from there to mass education, where we realized there are some benefits here, and we're going to provide education for the masses. Now, the masses were still limited, and who qualified for education, right? So we still saw limitations on education is only for landowners, or education is only for males. Okay. And finally, we get to the last phase, which is the phase we're currently in, where we believe education is universal, right? And this starts in 1948 with the UN Declaration of Human Rights, where we realize education is a human right, right? And we see in 1990, the first Education for All movement, and then in 2000, and we see these rounds of global goals where we really believe that everybody, regardless of your background, should have an education. So that was it globally. In Scotland, we were a little bit ahead of the time 175 years ago. We were actually seen as a world leader. We had foreign dignitaries come over and study Scotland's education system, especially in rural areas. Okay. We started looking beyond denominational to non-denominational schools. So in 1850, you came to Scotland, you would see most education was happening in churches or in church-run schools. And we had a literacy rate well below the rest of what is now the UK. It's well below England and Wales. I talked about having 1 out of 5 globally in school. In Scotland, that was closer to 1 out of 2. And so we were already one of the leaders 175 years ago when Moray House started. And today, we're close to universal education. Okay, we're so close that it's actually hard to find numbers because we don't actually count anymore. We just kind of assume everybody's got education. But we do know that there's inequalities out there still across Scotland. So while everybody might have access that might look different, the quality of education might look different, we still have inequalities in access, whether that's by urban rural areas, whether that's by family income, gender, disability status, it's still there. Right, next. So we see a massive growth in education over the last 175 years, individuals accessing it. I want to start with thinking about, well, why have we seen that? And when I reflect on this, in many ways, it's the same reason that we've had students and faculty come through Moray House doors over 175 years. And whether it's 100 years ago, 150 years ago, 5 years ago, the reason people come to study education is often because they believe in education, right? They believe education has some benefits out there, and they believe education can do something positive for individuals and society. So let's talk about what education can do. Let's talk about the positive parts of education. And we're going to start with this. Remember, I'm education and development, so I look at a very macro picture in education. And we're going to start with education can reduce poverty. So looking at some of the research, we see that education reduces income inequality. And it does that by lifting up the bottom 20%. It has lower levels of poverty in countries. Here, in our graph, we can see as the level of schooling goes down, the share in poverty increases. So education can help reduce poverty. It does that in part by more educated individuals are more likely to participate in the labor market. And when they participate, they're more likely to have higher income. But it's not just these, quote, objective studies. When we ask them about how their lives are going, they're more likely to say, I'm doing well. Right, so the self-reported is interesting. And one of the studies I did a while ago, looking at Malawi, if we took a single cohort, we said, okay, we're going to take this single, let's say, age 12 cohort, and we're going to raise it from the average education in Malawi, which is about 7.5 years, to the end of secondary. So if they completed secondary education, this cohort, we saw that they would work on average 144 more hours a year. They would have an average income 36% higher than they did if they just stopped their education at the mean. And nationally, this would have a tremendous benefit on the taxes that the government was able to collect, right? To the point where just from this single cohort, the government would be collecting an additional 500 million or 580 million Malawian kwacha every year. Okay. So massive benefits for what education can do for reducing poverty in a country. Education can improve our individual and our population health. So here, education is associated with a lower mortality rate. Okay, an additional year of education is associated with about a 2% decrease in mortality rate. It's associated with increased life expectancy, the reduced likelihood of getting a chronic disease, improved health literacy, which obviously impacts the rest of your health as well, and better healthy behaviors. The more educated individuals are less likely to smoke. They're less likely to drink excessively. They're more likely to exercise. And maternal education especially is important here. We look at one additional year of education of the mother is associated with a 3% decrease in under 5 mortality. So there are reduced levels of child wasting and stunting, improved child nutrition from educating mothers. And part of that's due to the greater autonomy they have. More educated mothers are more likely to have decision-making authority in the family. And when they have that authority, they're more likely to invest that in their children's health and education. So education can also increase political engagement. Now, this is probably some of the most mixed evidence out there is how that happens. But more educated individuals are at least more likely to be interested in politics. Doesn't mean they're going to vote a particular way, but they're more likely to be interested in it. They're more likely to understand how the government works and have high levels of knowledge around these political issues. They're more likely to support political freedom, including the right to vote for everybody. And they're more likely to vote. And finally, education can create a more inclusive world. And this is often done by more educated individuals being more likely to accept others and different perspectives. So they have an increased faith in people and trust in people. They're going to be more tolerant of those that look different, than speak different, than believe differently than they do. They're going to reject some of the negative racial stereotypes or misinformation out there. They're going to believe more in egalitarian views around gender, for instance. And they're more likely to identify as a global citizen, to keep away from some of our nationalist sentiment, recognize that they're part of something bigger out there globally. Now, just because education can do these things, it doesn't mean it always does these things. Right? And at the end of this year, sure all the students here will have a sense on what really is the best answer when somebody asks, hey, is education related to, let's just say voting? And the correct answer is almost always it depends, right? It always depends on the context. So all of these education cans are not education always does. So I want to talk very briefly about, there's lots we can talk about context. So I want to talk very briefly about some of the context that I've seen as important. Specifically in my work in education and health, we're looking at education working at sometimes as a risk factor, where more educated individuals are more likely to be sick. And sometimes education works as a social vaccine. And there's really an important aspect that the environment plays when we think about education as a risk factor, social vaccine. So this is the social, political, informational environment. Right. So, no, thanks. There we go. Oh, okay, thank you. So part of this is thinking back when I said education can reduce chronic disease. Well, that's true, but we need to consider basically what stage of development across what is understood as the epidemiological transition a country is in. So if you think about the ages, you're most likely to have a chronic disease, right? There are countries that haven't aged into chronic disease yet, and the countries that have these lower life expectancies, the ones with more education, are more likely to live longer. Okay, great benefit of education also means you're more likely to have a chronic disease. So at that point, more educated individuals actually are at a risk for greater chronic disease. When the country ages, education becomes a social vaccine, and more educated individuals are less likely to have that. Another example is around obesity, and what's understood as a nutrition transition. So nutrition transition says that there's times in kind of the economic development of a country where countries start eating more sugar, more processed food, right? And again, at the beginning, as they're starting to move into that, the first people that have access to this, which is a little bit more expensive, tend to be the more educated. So early in the nutrition transition, we see educated individuals more likely to be obese. And after the country has fully transitioned into this, then we see education working as a social vaccine. And the final example for this slide is on smoking. So now in Scotland, we probably believe education and smoking, more educated individuals less likely to smoke, right? But again, this depends on the information that's available, because the only way we can use the cognitive benefits of education is if we have accurate information. So initially, when information is poor, we see more educated individuals not having any benefit. And that was true in smoking. Go ahead. This was really first studied when we were looking at HIV and AIDS in sub-Saharan Africa. Okay, so here, there's a lot of contradictory evidence out there. People are wondering, well, why are we starting to see more educated individuals more likely to get HIV and AIDS? And so we started looking at information periods, right? If you remember back in the early 90s, late 80s, information about HIV and AIDS was really poor, okay, especially in sub-Saharan Africa. And so we broke these things into 3 different information periods. And at the top here, in this information void period, where there's really nothing happening, we saw that, generally speaking, those are positive slopes, which means more educated individuals were actually more likely to get HIV. If we skip through the partial information and come down to the full information period, where information was accurate and publicly available, we see individuals that were more educated were less likely to get HIV and AIDS. Okay. So the social, political, environmental context really helps mediate the effect between education and a variety of benefits. Next. Something you always hear about is, well, okay, so there's an impact on education, on society, but isn't it really only an impact when education is of good quality? And we'll challenge that in a second, but definitely how and where we deliver education can matter, right? So how civic education is delivered can have an effect on whether or not education leads to political knowledge, political engagement, political participation. We know that if we're trying to increase tolerance, that certain types of education are going to be more effective. right? So anti-racist education, multicultural education are more likely to lead to political tolerance. We know that if you're trying to bring in egalitarian views, you need a curriculum that demonstrates that shows that says women in this curriculum are equal, right? And are participating at an equal rate in society. And we also need to think about sometimes education outside of the classroom and what it can do. So we're thinking about understanding in conflict. So a lot of the literature on education and conflict say it may not be what happens in the classroom. Sometimes it's about the experience outside of the classroom. Right? So this is a study looking at memory sites and individuals that part of their experience was looking at memorials or museums, and they had a better understanding of conflict and a sense of togetherness in the community through that. So quality can be important, but it's also important to think about what is quality. One of my issues is thinking about quality as a very narrow bit in society. So if you've ever heard me talk before, it's about quality as test scores, and it drives me nuts. What's important is we need to think about quality as multifaceted, right? There's multiple potential understandings of education quality, which are really locally constructed and around a couple of different characteristics. So are we thinking about education quality as a single universal quality? Because that will define how we understand it and also how we measure it, versus something that's locally defined. Are we thinking about quality as holistic across subjects, across formal, non-formal, and informal schooling? Right? Or are we thinking it as very partially? And are we thinking about, again, formal schooling versus all forms of education? So there's lots of potential ways that you can come up with a definition of quality just by thinking of different parts of these characteristics. The narrow view of quality right now, which dominates, is a sense that if you're a good school, it's because you have more individuals meeting, your A levels, and you've got these great marks and tests. And what's important is to think about those narrow views can actually look a lot worse when we talk about inclusion. Right, so these are just two very generic potential education systems here. And it's interesting to think about which one's higher quality, right? Because you know what? If I take just our top two scores, and that's all I want to focus on, I can have a really good quality school and I'll just exclude the rest. I'll have great marks, but I'm not very inclusive. And to me, that's not really quality, right? So we need to be thinking about something beyond these kind of narrow versions of quality. We're thinking about how education can affect society. Finally, for me, we also need to be thinking about an investment in education, right? So yes, education can do amazing things, but we need to invest in it. So research shows that the amount you invest in education is important, including for things like tolerance. Whether education is going to lead to greater tolerance for different ethnicities and different religious groups. Teachers are incredibly important for that. Okay, the importance of having a qualified teacher in a classroom. There's lots of different benefits for that. For this presentation, just wanted to bring up the importance of teachers for the beliefs about migrants and migrants' own sense of belonging in the school. And finally, just a little bit of concern I have, which is very common in development, where we see access and expansion being put forward without real considerations for investment. Right? So countries that are going to quickly expand compulsory education without an expansion of funding. So here, in this race for expansion, we see that more and more individuals are going to school, but we're not investing properly in teachers, in infrastructure, in teaching materials, and in student support to make sure it meets the needs of the students there. All right. So that's it from me, and looking back a little bit and talking about what education can do, but that does not always does do. Did I say that right? Maybe I said that right. Okay. Now I want to invite Sarah up, who's going to be talking a little bit, looking forward, about research practice partnerships in education and how that can bring benefits to society. So thanks, Sarah.
Okay, well, good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. It's wonderful to see so many people here. As Will's just been talking about, he's been talking about the kind of the positive and the enriching and transformative impact of education. And now I'm going to move on to thinking a little about educational research and looking to the future and how research practice partnerships may be one way to bring about positive real-world change. Thank you. So research practice partnerships are really about working beyond the boundaries of university, working in collaboration with organizations and other professionals in order to conduct research where we've got shared interests, commitments, passions, visions, etc., etc. And I think that research practice partnerships have considerable potential to ensure that the research that we carry out is more educational, meaningful and relevant, and is more likely to result in positive real-world change. So research practice partnerships are a form of collaborative research. And really, they're about drawing upon and synthesizing the knowledge, experience, and expertise from both research and from practice, and working together in order to improve children and young people's educational experiences and outcomes, or working towards educational improvement in other ways. And in the last decade or so, I think we've seen growing interest in the use of research practice partnerships as a way of conducting educational research. And a lot of this work has been primarily conducted within the US, but we are seeing lots of other examples from elsewhere too. And from my perspective, research practice partnerships are about a sort of shift, I suppose, moving from the kind of dominant narrative of research informing practice to practice sometimes informing research, and the priorities and perspectives and interests of the teaching profession informing our research agenda and the types of questions that we ask and how we do research as well. So I tend to talk a lot about connecting research and practice in this way. Thank you. I've actually, spoken a lot about research practice partnerships previously, and what I tend to do is focus on the benefits and methodological considerations. And so I'm not going to talk about that too much now, but if you're interested, there's a paper there on this. But from my perspective, some of the benefits is that there is potential to narrow the gap between research and practice. But what I found personally is that it just allows us to do better research. Our research is underpinned by a much broader knowledge and experience base than we would have if we were just working independently as a researcher. As researchers, we tend to have access to the academic literature only, but when we're working with practice partners, we have access to a whole range of other information too. And this can really benefit the work that we do. It also supports both researchers and teachers' professional development. And in some of the work that we've been doing recently, we've been evaluating research practice partnerships from our practice partners' perspectives as well. And this is one of the ways in which they feel that it enriches their learning. But of course, we don't want to romanticize them too much. There's a lot of methodological considerations and challenges associated with working in this way as well. Some of them may be that there's just simply different priorities between those people who work in research and those people that work in practice. And unless we are willing to compromise or find a common ground, it may mean that we end up doing projects that satisfy neither those from research or from practice. And of course, unless we're used to working in this way, working collaboratively in order to conduct our research, then it can mean that we're working in atypical ways, in ways which we have no knowledge, no experience, and so it can lead to challenges, I suppose, in the development and implementation of research studies. Thanks. So what I thought I would do first of all, before I move on to thinking about sort of looking forward and ways in which we may want to create a kind of systemic change in how we do research, I thought it would be a good idea, first of all, just to celebrate some of the research practice partnerships which are going on within Moray House at the moment. These are just some of them, and I feel really privileged to be part of a school where there's 6 examples, and I know that there's so many others as well. And I also know that there's a lot of participatory research going on within the school too. And actually, there's a lot of parallels between research practice partnerships and participatory approaches in terms of the values and the principles that underpin them. But first of all, I'd just like to celebrate the work which is being done by researchers within Moray House, specifically within the Childhood and Youth Studies Research Group, where they're playing a key role in the Observatory of Children's Human Rights Scotland. And this is a collaboration of Scottish organisations which are working to drive the implementation of children's human rights in Scotland. And this important work is particularly timely because, as many of you will know, the United Nations Conventions of the Rights of the Child have recently become embedded within Scottish law. Okay. Within the outdoor environmental education team, these researchers have been working in a sustained partnership with Learning for Sustainability Scotland, and they've been working together in order to create a robust, integrated evidence base to outline the pedagogical benefits of learning for sustainability. So there's some really important, exciting, and again, timely work going on there. Within the developmental psychology and education team, this is the group that I'm a part of, we're working in partnership with lots of different organisations to ensure that our psychological research really reaches those people that it's meant to have a positive impact on, so that it can make a meaningful difference to the lives and learning of children and young people. Last week, if any of you were here, you would have seen the wonderful presentation by Audrey Cameron and Rachel O'Neill. And within this, they were celebrating some of their research with the deaf community. And the Scottish Sensory Centre works with deaf community and visually impaired communities too, in addition to advocacy organisations and industry partners. And they work to ensure that their research is informed by community priorities, but they also work to ensure that their research informs the professional learning and the resources that they create. Meanwhile, in the Literacy Lab, where I work, we're working in partnership with teachers, school leaders, national and community literacy organisations, in addition to the library sector and publishers, to ensure the literacy research that we conduct aligns with priorities of practice and has a meaningful impact on children's literacy experiences and outcomes. Okay, and then last but not least, researchers within Childlight are working with global partners around the world to understand the nature, the scale and the prevalence of child sexual exploitation and abuse. And Childlight are using their data to inform organisations and governments to ensure that they're able to make informed decisions to safeguard children. So as I said, these are just 6 different examples within Moray House, and there are lots of other brilliant examples too. And tonight, Will and I are really just focusing on education, but a couple of weeks ago, Ilse Niven gave a talk focusing on the impactful research, which is being carried out by the Physical Activity for Health Research Group. So lots of brilliant examples. Okay. So when Will and I were talking about this work, because we tend to work separately, we thought, well, how are we going to frame this entire presentation? We decided that Will was going to look back, looking at the expansion of education and the transformative impact of education, and that I would sort of look forward and think about educational research and how we may want to bring about real-world change through research practice partnerships. And so just to say, the rest of this presentation is really focused on an open dialogue that I was invited to contribute towards a couple of years ago. So after giving a presentation on research practice partnerships, Andrew Holloman asked if I would write an article talking about why I felt we needed a methodological shift in how we did research, what the benefits and considerations were associated with working in this way, and also some of my own personal experiences and reflections from working this way too. And to this initial article, we had 8 responses. So 8 other people responded with articles of their own, sharing their own perspectives and experiences of working in this way. And I'd just like to acknowledge the authors of this open dialogue, because they've really shaped my thinking and my understanding about what the key enablers may be to bring about this change within the UK. So Professor William Pignell and Dr. Simon Scholland are, to me, 2 of the sort of internationally leading thinkers and researchers in this area. Professor Pignell has got decades of experience in the US working in research practice partnerships, and he's written extensively on this. Simon is an earlier career researcher, but has written a number of seminal articles which have really enhanced our understanding about research practice partnerships. For me, it was really important to have in this open dialogue the perspectives of educators as well. We can't have just researchers talking about research practice partnerships. We need to ensure that we're also having the perspectives of those in practice. Megan Dixon and Robin McPherson are 2 educators that are really working at the intersection of research and practice, and are school leaders who are committed to ensuring that research is translated for those working in practice. And finally, Courtney Newbury, Emma Vardy, Laura Crane and Maggie Snowling are all psychologists working in the UK, whether in language, literacy or inclusion, but each of them are working in sustained partnerships or networks in order to ensure that the work that they do has a meaningful impact within education. And as a result of their 8 articles, I then wrote a closing piece in which I summarised some of their thoughts and then started to set out what I thought would be the key enablers if we were to think about change. Okay, so maybe next slide. Okay, perfect. So one of the first ones, I think, is around funding. Research practice partnerships are not self-sustaining. We need funding in order to initiate and sustain research practice partnerships. And I think in the last decade or so, we've seen a positive shift towards funders seeking applications which explicitly involve those from practice or participatory research within initial grant applications. And so I think that this is a really positive move, that we've got these partnerships being encouraged from the outset. However, one of the principles behind research practice partnerships is that they're non-hierarchical. Okay, we're trying to remove the power imbalances that may exist in research and practice. And at the moment, all funding is allocated to the higher education institution, which is then distributed out to practice partners. And I think it's really hard to challenge power dynamics when it's the universities that hold all of the funding for grants. So I would be interested to see different models of funding. I also think it's important that this funding, in order to robustly evaluate research practice partnerships, if I'm going to make the case that these are beneficial and that we should be investing in them, we need to know what the value added is from working in this way. And we need robust evaluations that take into account both the perspectives of researchers and those in practice that we work with, but also a kind of robust evaluation of the methods that we use as well. So I think funding to evaluate RPPs is really important. Okay, thanks. Perfect. Then going on to thinking about infrastructure, I think that given the diversity of actors within the education system, given the complexity of issues within education as well, I don't think a one-size-fits-all approach would ever work in terms of infrastructure. But I do think that there's space for kind of national versus more local and quite flexible approaches to infrastructure. At a national level, what I would hope to see would be maybe a hub where there was sort of high quality training, which allowed researchers to learn together and working in this way, and which brought in different forms of contact and communication between those in research and practice. And at a more local or more project-specific level, the nature of the research practice partnerships would probably be decided by those working on them. When thinking about the nature of these relationships, we can think about long-term sustained relationships with partners. So many of the projects that I've done have been with the same project partners. We've worked together for several years now across different projects. And one of the benefits is that we know each other very well. We've got very close, productive, established working relationships. But of course, there are also some instances where a specific project may require a very different type of skill set or knowledge base. And so I think flexibility in that respect is also important. And when thinking about infrastructure, we often don't think about principles, but to me, when thinking about infrastructure, we do need to think about the principles and the values that would underpin this and the ways of working. And I think research practice partnerships really are about these sort of respect for different people's perspectives, about trust, about positive communication, and about creating non-hierarchical relationships. So I think any infrastructure that is created needs to be inclusive and needs to make sure that it's continuing to think of this. I think training is important as well. Research practice partnerships require us to work in atypical ways. And if we don't have experience in working in this way, it could potentially be quite difficult to imagine how this may go. And so I think it would be beneficial to have some training for researchers to ensure that they're more confident to be able to conduct research practice partnerships, and that they feel that they have the skills and the dispositions in order to lead on this type of work. And one of the things that I found myself is that although I'm a researcher, when I work in research practice partnerships, I'm often a facilitator. And what my role is facilitating different contributions and making sure that everyone's voice is involved in that. And one of the benefits to me as a researcher is that I'm continuing to kind of professionally develop all of the time. And I think research practice partnerships hold considerable promise for us across any stage of our career to continue to develop. Okay. In terms of time, I had nothing smarter to say than it is essential to consider. From my perspective, time is probably our most precious resource, and it's the thing that I value most of the practice partners that I work with. And so it's really about creating research practice partnerships that are not going to be overly labor intensive or time intensive, but that really are about coming together and feeling that you've got a shared purpose, a shared goal, but that it's not too much to do. Okay. I think incentives are really important to consider as well. I think given that a lot of us are not used to working in this way, that we don't necessarily have the infrastructure that exists either, that we may not have the contacts or the networks in order to work in this way. We really do need to incentivize this way of working. And I think funders have played a role within this. But one of the things that I've been really positive to see actually is a shift within the research excellence framework towards only impact to now being about engagement and impact. And I don't think engagement has been defined yet, but I would imagine that it's not tokenistic engagement, but rather it is about sustained, meaningful partnerships with practice and other professionals, which make a real difference to the research that we carry out. But we do need to think about incentives for those in practice. Very often the time contribution that those in practice make to these research studies is before they're even funded, when you're coming up with those ideas initially and you're thinking about how you're going to do the research. And there's very few incentives for people to give their time to a grant that may not be funded. And so I think funding for practice partners to be involved in that early stage would be a really important incentive. Thank you. And then the final point is really around accountability. So I am an advocate for research practice partnerships, but I also want to stress that I'm an advocate for other traditional forms of research too. But for me, research practice partnerships really raise big questions when we think about what is the purpose of research? Who is research for? Who judges the quality of research? And what outcomes would be used to measure success? At the moment, we're working in a system which is very researcher dominated, where our peer review process is reviewed by researchers only. And I think that when we think about working in research practice partnerships, we do need to recognize that this may be different and a research article may look different. So what does methodological rigor, for example, look like within a research practice partnership, as opposed to within a more kind of traditional or basic form of research? And I think these are questions that we will be increasingly needing to ask ourselves as we move to the next ref, because we are seeing a shift in how people do research, but I don't think we've necessarily set up the criteria of what this will look like. Okay. So just to say, Will and I were very excited and slightly nervous, I think, as well, to be giving this talk today, but it's really wonderful to celebrate 170 years with you all. Research, looking back, has been a force for positive change and has had a transformative impact globally. You've learned about the kind of expansion of education, the positive and enriching and transformative impact that it's had on children and young people's lives, albeit the nuance within that as well that's important to consider. And what I want to do is sort of think about, well, how can we use educational research in order to result in positive real-world change? And I do think that research practice partnerships and participatory research approaches really have a strong role to play in that. And I'd be really interested to hear people's thoughts and discussion in relation to that. So just to say thank you all for listening, opportunities for questions, reflections, discussion. Hold on, one more slide. And perhaps a little celebration too, because 175 years is an important and momentous event. So thank you all for joining us this evening. And we're open for questions. I think we all maybe have our own microphones for us. Okay.
Great. Well, wasn't that scintillating? I so enjoyed learning more about Will and Sarah's perspectives, and I imagine you did as well. I think the clarity of your presentation, Will, really struck me, and just how you explained how poverty, for example, could have positive impacts by education. I thought that was really powerful. And Sarah, I'm utterly persuaded now by research practice partnerships, but I also appreciated how you took a bit of a critical eye.
Yeah.
So, you know, your point about sort of what does rigor that mean, I think is a really interesting one to engage with. So thank you. Well, what are you all thinking? Is there a question or a comment either online or in the room? And just to say that I'll encourage you as the chair just to say who you are and however you want to identify in terms of, you know, coming to that particular question. You might be a parent, practitioner, or coming from an organization, for example.
Thank you very much, both. My name is Tom McIntyre. I'm retired member of staff from here. But it was a question for Sarah, really, and it was in your 6 points that you had. One that I felt was maybe missing or maybe could be emphasized was dissemination. And I just wondered how you find yourself going about disseminating to practice community as well as the academic research communities?
No, that's a really good point. So from my perspective, research practice partnerships are about partnerships throughout the whole research process, from that initial planning of the research study to conducting the research together to disseminating the research findings. And I suppose one of the potential challenges that we're finding from working in research practice partnerships is that we're having an impact, or we're having just lots of dissemination strategies before the academic article is even published, because it takes so long for research to go through the peer review system. So I think working in this way just allows lots of opportunities to communicate your research with lots of different organizations and sectors. And I find that a lot of them are very generous with their time and put me in touch with other people. But the speed at which academic research gets published means that very often that impact and dissemination, you know, the practice partners telling everyone about the project, you know, a year before it's actually published. So I think, for example, preprints are quite a good way of uploading research into the Open Science Framework, for example, so people can see the study that's been published. And of course, practice partners are often skilled in dissemination, not just having networks, but also knowing how to communicate ideas in a way that's going to really reach and resonate with the people that you want to reach. And so I found that I've really benefited from relationships in that way too. But I would like to just stress that for me, it's not just about the communication and dissemination. It really is about that involvement all the way through the research process. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. And do you want to comment as well from your perspectives?
Yeah, sure. So I do quite a bit of work with civil society and government in my research. And I think part of it is just recognizing that the partner oftentimes knows best how to disseminate. So I think while we're kind of pushed to develop academic literature and research and so forth, oftentimes that's not what's going to be read or what's going to be important locally. So thinking with the partner about, is that going to be a blog on their site? Is that something that's a local forum? Or is that a different way to communicate locally? I think is really important.
And I think, sorry, just coming back to the last point that I had about accountability, I think the question I had was what outcomes would be used to measure success? And I think we still have a system where the outcome to measure success is academic articles, but actually a lot of funded projects now, the biggest output may be something for professionals as well. So, and I think that funders are increasingly open to outcomes and outputs, not just being academic articles, but actually more broadly being other forms of communication.
Well, thank you so much for that question, which obviously was engaging. Oh, thank you. Starting to come in. Do you mind?
Hi, I'm Rob. I'm from MSc Education Futures at the EFI. I think my question is more directed towards Sarah, but I think it influences both. With regards to these research practice partnerships, what's the effect on inequality? Because I would imagine, but I may be wrong, that societies that are more developed would have more opportunities for these research practice partnerships. And therefore, this would lead education, it would kind of increase the barrier for entry for education. And then these would be harder to be replicated in societies which are less developed. So I don't know what you could say about this, maybe.
I think that's a really interesting reflection, and there's probably not that much I can say to it. But one of the things that I have found from working in research practice partnerships within the UK is that sometimes when you're working with national organisations, they're great in terms of the scale and the impact and reach, but actually often still they're quite disconnected from the communities that you want to work with. And actually sometimes the better research practice partnerships, depending on your research questions, are community organisations which are much more connected to the sort of the lives and the priorities of the communities that you want to work with. So I would say that research practice partnerships can and should take different forms. And I think there's definitely ways to sort of minimize inequalities, but I just want to stress that I wouldn't argue for national over community in any way. They just offer very different things.
It was a good question. Will might want to come. Do you have any comments from your own experience or thoughts?
I mean, nothing that comes to mind directly, but just from my own observations, what happened with COVID, for example, with the move online, I saw that I come from Malta, which isn't an underdeveloped country, but I saw that inequality rose over the time of COVID, because whereas education was supposedly made more accessible online, you had families who had 3 kids with only 1 computer. And so the inequality over that year and a half of education increased. And so the developments that went on to online education couldn't be copied for those families then. So my question was along those lines, kind of.
And I would say, I think I said already, I feel like there are parallels between participatory approaches, which is sort of more meaningful inclusion of families, children, young people, people from marginalized or minority groups, and research practice partnerships, which do tend to involve working with professionals who are in a position to support. So I think from my experiences, technology has had a positive impact on the types of partnerships that we've been able to do, because we've been able to work with teachers and school leaders and other professionals across the UK, coming together in kind of time-strapped time, the end of a school day, to meet online for an hour. So technology's had a really positive impact in that way. But I think in participatory approaches where you're trying to create inclusive environments, then I think you do really need to think beyond technology to do that. I'd agree.
Yeah. And Will, would you like to come in?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of things that are important thinking about partnerships and inequality. So I'm the academic lead for the Data for Children Collaborative. One thing I really like about that is that they start with the end user, right? So it's usually the government or UNICEF that comes in and says, hey, this is the big question we have. And then the collaborative starts saying, okay, who wants to work on this? And they bring a collaborative or a collection together based on skill sets. So that they can bring data scientists together with data developers, with psychologists, with all these other different people. But I think one of the benefits of the partnership is that you ask the right question, right? And that's so important for inequality, where a lot of times researchers, we come in, what are we interested in? And it may not be that relevant to the local community. So I think the research practice partnership gets to the right question first. And the other thing I just wanted to highlight, I think Sarah's point on funding is really important. And that type of, if all the power is still locally held at the university, then it's really hard to get past inequality. So hopefully that redistribution of funding to the partners is really important. So.
Thank you. Oh, great. And so next person, and then just I'll check online in case there's somebody else, but please go ahead.
Thank you so much. I'm Rovinsa, just joined the Center for Research in Digital Education and the Global South. Done a lot of kind of work, of course not a lot, but work on North-South partnerships for both research and international development. From your work, what do you find the most kind of beneficial strategies or kind of partnership approaches that facilitate work within North-South research partnerships?
Thank you for that question. And was that directed particularly to Sarah, Will, or are you hoping to both go for it? Okay, both of you.
Okay, yeah.
First, it's wonderful to see you in person. And we've chatted online some, so welcome to Moray House. Yeah, I mean, I think there are challenges in the way, especially UK research is structured within this, where oftentimes the lead investigator is supposed to be based here. So a lot of it is about us trying to figure out how do we structure a project in the way that isn't us structuring the project, right? I don't want it to be us leading the project or saying this is how it's to happen. I think the time is really important. Oftentimes we're rushing to get a proposal off the ground. And because of that, there's this massive pressure and you end up with a couple of individuals that are pushing the project forward. And if we're going to be a full partnership, there needs to be time to really develop this understanding of each other, to work together, to get to know each other better, understand the different needs and local questions. So I think time and then kind of the way things are structured are barriers to a more collaborative process a lot of the time.
So I think I'd be really interested in sort of discussions about what this might look like globally, because all of my research really has been within the UK. And one of the things that I've written about as well is that research practice partnerships work well when there's a kind of consensus on what the issue is and the best way to solve it. But some issues in education, there's really polarized perspectives, and that doesn't mean that we shouldn't have research practice partnerships coming together. But I do think that there are some challenges that we may need to think about as well within the UK. So I've maybe presented a kind of positive experience of what they may look like. But I think that they can look different. And I think if you're working in different countries with different contexts, different systems, different priorities, different ways of doing things as well, I think that would add another level of challenge. But I think if we want to move thinking forward and practice forward in terms of research practice partnerships, we need to start sharing our knowledge, learning together in order to do this.
Thank you. And just an invitation, do you have other ideas you'd like to add to the mix?
No.
Come back in a year or two and you can give the lecture. Fantastic. Is there anything online just to make sure we're checking? Oh, great. Okay. So obviously my glasses aren't good enough. I have to come see it. So I'll read it out. Yeah. I see that there have been partnerships with organizations, but have there been partnerships with councils and or schools on a local level? And how successful have they been?
Yeah, so I think, within my own experiences, we've had partnerships, for example, with Edinburgh City Council on a project and with local schools as well. And actually in this open dialogue as well, a couple of the contributions were about local networks of teachers coming together in order to inform the research that was being done or to disseminate the research findings more locally as well. So I do think that there's potential for it to work well regardless, as long as there's sort of that shared interest in the topic and that the nature of the relationship is positive and collaborative as well. So yeah, I suppose a lot of my experience does tend to be with larger organizations, but I think that the principles and practices work equally well for schools. I guess the only point I would make is that often within organizations, there's research capacity and a bit of time to contribute towards this. But in schools, teachers often have very little time. They're doing this in their own time. And that's where I really try to make it as sort of time effective as possible. I don't know if there's anything.
No, I think that's interesting. And I know in my experience, sometimes we actually try to fund, you mentioned funding.
Yeah.
And sometimes that can make the difference for
Absolutely.
people to really be involved.
Yeah.
Excellent questions and points so far. Oh, thank you. Oh, should we just keep with that one and then we'll come there? Thank you. I wondered whether time was an enabler or barrier for teachers. Thank you, Lauren.
I would say from my own experiences, time seems to be a barrier for teachers. All of the collaborative and co-design work that we've done has often been outside of teachers' work day. So at the end of the day, they've been funded to contribute towards it. But you also have to recognize that they're often just exhausted or cooking dinner at the same time. So I have not really seen many examples of time being an enabler, although I do know that there's a requirement for teachers to continue to engage in professional inquiry. And I think that this can be a form of quality professional inquiry. So yeah, enabler in that way.
Good. And there was a question or point down here, wasn't there? Great.
Thanks both for your presentations this afternoon. Really interesting. Thank you. My name is Willie French. I've been in primary education for 40 years, 27 as a primary head teacher. But my question is from the role of being chair of Upstart Scotland. So I just wonder if you could have any ideas about how you can address the challenge of politicians recognising the value of research, because politicians are in the position of influencing change, as we know at Upstart Scotland, but they seem to be the audience who value research the least, or at least don't recognise it. So I was just wondering if you could answer how you think that challenge might be addressed.
No, I might come back to you as
That's a big
well.
question.
So just remember, you are being recorded.
Would you like, I can speak to it, but do you want to go first?
Yeah, I'll go ahead and get started on that. And Kay, you might actually have some experience on this too. You might want to jump in. So I think that is a challenge, right? So they're the ones that are most likely to be able to change policy and so forth. I think there are probably two things that I would say. One is, are we writing in a way or in a forum that they're going to care about? And so oftentimes we're writing for each other academically. We know that they don't have time to read a 12-page paper that's very technical. So are we writing, the short highlight version that they're actually going to be able to look at and see? So that's the first thing, is are we writing appropriately for the audience? The second thing I think is important is to understand that oftentimes they're being guided by assistants and others that have expertise in these different areas, whether it's education or health. And so I think the first time I tried to influence policy, I was like, oh, I need to go talk to the minister. I need to go talk to the minister. Well, you're never going to get an audience with the minister, right? And they're not going to have the time to talk to you. So you end up talking to the team that talks to the minister. So you need to figure out what the landscape is in order to influence that. So I think it is both those things. Like, are you writing in a way that's going to be accessible and useful and kind of appropriate for the local? And then are you talking to the right person that might actually have the ear of the person who's going to make a decision?
Yeah, I think I would just echo some of what Will said. I think that as researchers, the onus on us is to understand the policy landscape and the policy priorities and talk about our research in a way that really resonates with the things that they care about. Within the British Education Research Association, there's a special interest group on educational policy and policy making, and it's been led by Craig Skerritt, who's a former policy broker, and actually he's written a really interesting article on mechanisms between kind of brokering that relationship between research and practice. And just as with research and practice, I feel like we're sort of narrowing the gap a little bit. I do feel like the gap is closing between research, policy and practice in some ways in terms of the lines of communication and the openness to hearing different things. But I do think that there's a long way to go. But I feel like my knowledge is probably in the research practice space as opposed to in the research policy space. But yeah, like I said, Craig Skerritt's work's really informative in this regards. Okay.
And any words of wisdom you want to give?
I think wisdom's quite wide of the mark, but I recognise how you responded, Will, because if you don't mind me saying a little bit about the organisation I chair, which is Upstart Scotland, our ultimate aspiration is to raise the school starting age of primary children in Scotland. If you look at our website, there's a wealth of research that backs this up, but the barriers that you cited about actually getting an audience are barriers that I recognise. However, we do have ministerial meetings coming up, so maybe the landscape's changing.
Yeah, and if I were to add, I mean, I think every context is different, of course, as you're saying. So I'm speaking more about Scotland or UK and Europe, where I've done more things. I guess I'd reflect as I find politicians are quite relational. I mean, the backbench ones in particular. So it's different if it's a minister, yeah. And I think it's important. I find to realize that. So basically, if you become a trusted person, they will just turn to you and ask for it. So that's not usually an academic's job to be the trusted person. So I think finding the people who are, and then, in some ways, then it's not like, I think most of the time, your greatest success is when everybody else thinks it's their idea. Do you know what I mean? Yeah. Yeah. Occasionally you're just at the right time with the research project, but I think that's rare. I think more some of that. We can talk tactics. Yeah. Anything else online? Oh, great. And I'll come there next. No to online. Lauren, I hope you're satisfied. Great. It's on.
Thank you. My name is Oti Sotese. I was the Moray House entry of the year Millennium 2000. That's about 24 years ago. I did my BA here in community education, and I went on to do my master's in political science and social anthropology at the other side, which is the same Edinburgh University. And my question is, the development and the knowledge of artificial intelligence, is it going to have any effect on the research practice partnership? And is it something we should be worried about or anything at all? Somebody mentioned the politicians there. I was a Labour Party parliamentary candidate in the 2016 elections as well. So that, I mean, I was fascinated by the political questions about politicians in there anyway. So is artificial intelligence something we should be worried about in this the research practice partnership at all or anything?
So, I mean, I would say my main area of research, I mean, methodologically is research practice partnerships, but actually I'm a literacy researcher and I'm all about trying to encourage more children and young people to read books. I read a lot of books myself and I don't know much about tech or AI, but there's probably lots of potential, but I think lots of concerns as well. And I really wouldn't know how to answer a question around how AI may facilitate or challenge or undermine it. But I would say that research practice partnerships are about, like, ultimately they're about quality relationships, about trust and respect with other people, about sharing your own personal knowledge and experiences of working in a certain way. And so I can see how technology can afford these conversations, but I can't see how AI would be able to bring that kind of personal experience and contextual knowledge as well that teachers and different organizations have. So personally, I don't know, but I don't really know about AI's capabilities. They may be more advanced than I understood. Do you have anything?
No, I think that the personal relationship that you're talking about is so important. So, and I'm also not AI, but we do have a wonderful Center for Digital Research and Education that does look at AI.
Yeah.
So.
They would probably be able to answer that better than me, sorry.
And clearly you need to talk with the upstart Scotland. We can interview you as a political candidate.
Yeah.
Good. Did you want to come back on AI? Is that good? Okay. And I love the fact that, you know, your history.
I know. Absolutely.
So I think we have two here, and then just for those in the room, probably starting to come to a close. So if you really want another question, make sure you get it in a moment. But let's start with Linda. Oh, this is lovely. Aww. Not a question, just a grateful comment. Aww. I'm a lecturer in ITE at UWS, and I refer to the school research partnerships as exemplified in Sarah's reading project when I work with our student teachers on the importance of inquiring dispositions in the professional lives of teachers. Linda, thank you. And Sarah, if you saw Sarah, nice. She's just really appreciating that. So thank you. I feel, Will, do you want to read the next one out? It feels weird maybe.
Sure. So first, Krista, it's nice to see you online. So it says, I agree wholeheartedly with the need to bridge the gap between policy and research on education. Very often politicians are most likely to be moved by research that demonstrates return on investment, as opposed to research on rights-based underpinnings of the importance of education. Yeah. Yes. Thinking about what moves politicians is quite challenging, but focusing on the right to education.
And I think your point about what is quality in it, you know, if we're thinking about what a return on investment is, it's like, what's your measure of quality? Is this about the number involved or,
Definitely. Right. So thank you, Kristen.
Right, and shall we take the next one?
At a time when teaching practices and pedagogies largely subscribe to certain standards and measurable outcomes as evidenced in our standards, I wonder whether we should also be rethinking professionalism practices among teachers. Thank you for leaving me thinking about this.
I want to think about that. And also maybe relates to what quality is, Will, do you think?
Yeah, I think generally speaking, we think of quality as a narrow concept that is only about learning achievement. Then we think of teachers as somebody who can be brought in off the street with expert knowledge on a particular subject. And we forget about the importance of pedagogical knowledge. And we forget about teachers as a professional. And so that sense that we need teachers that are treated as professionals, that are recognized for their expertise and able to adapt quickly and make decisions in their classroom is really important. So yes, I do think there needs to be a rethinking, especially in times where there is, you know, we think back to the COVID pandemic, where there needs to be quick decisions made. Teachers have that expert knowledge, they have local knowledge. They're the ones who are best able to answer whether or not your son or daughter has learned something, and we need to recognize that.
I guess if I could follow on from that, I suppose the only thing I would say is one of the programs that we co-created with teachers was a program called Love to Read. And in the program, what we specified was this kind of balance between fidelity and flexibility. So fidelity to the research-informed principles, but flexibility in terms of how teachers deliver the program so that we could draw upon their own professional and pedagogical knowledge, experience and expertise, and also knowledge of their learners and the context in which they're working in. And so I think research practice partnerships are about co-creating research, but I think the resources that we create as well should also leave scope for variation in how they're implemented so that that continues to sort of recognize the value and importance that teachers bring to the use of research. I think that teachers can improve the research that we create through their practice when they have a kind of depth of knowledge and when they have permission to do so.
I think thank you for those comments. It's been quite thought-provoking, haven't they, as well? Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you both for, hello? Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you both for the talk and for inspiring so many questions and notes. My name is Sofia. I graduated from the Masters of Comparative Education International Development. I would love to hear a bit more about the role, not of education, but higher education. I think I would be interested in hearing about the role of higher education in poverty reduction, as we have talked about just education. And also I would love to maybe start a small conversation, it can be a very big one, about the challenges that many people are facing trying to access higher education, how the job market is changing, who is now motivated to go to higher education, who can afford it. So if we do think that we want more people continuing higher education, completing higher education, and continuing in research pathways, et cetera, and working in education, what do we think are the challenges that we're facing right now on that? And people maybe more and more young people not seeing the value of it, or not seeing the value of some higher education degrees or degrees in tertiary education, colleges, universities, technical colleges, etc.
I think that's tough.
I know. That's definitely a question for Will. I have to
Will,
say.
an essay title in your MSc, right? Will
Yeah.
can send it the next
So
time.
thanks, Sophia. So I'm not going to be able to go into all the barriers to accessing higher education, but it is an interesting time to look at higher education in the UK right now, given budget constraints and so forth, and thinking about, the UK government has talked about how they're going to have to increase tuition fees in England. And what does that mean for access issues? How do we fund, whether through grants or loans, making sure everyone has the ability to attend higher education? So it's an interesting time to look at that in the UK right now. Thinking about higher education and poverty reduction is interesting. And one thing I didn't go into in this, and so you know this, and other people who will be in my classes will understand about the World Bank's rate of return analysis, right? So the rate of return analysis says that an additional year of education is equal to this much benefit economically, individually, and socially. And they used that in the 80s and 90s to drive their policy. And the rate of return analysis said that primary education has the greatest rate of return. So they constructed policies and limited funding in most of the global South to primary education. And what that did was it basically kept almost like a colonial perspective within that, where countries were not almost permitted to pursue higher education or invest in higher education. And so higher education continued to be something that happened in the UK or the US, parts of the global North, but not in the global South. And so there was this dependency that happened based on the policy of the World Bank, which created a lot of problems. And there wasn't a recognition until much later that higher education could have these benefits. And so things like, if we're looking at leaders and innovation and so forth, and we wanted to create and generate, jobs and businesses, oftentimes higher education does prompt those type of skills. But given this kind of fairly narrow early analysis by the World Bank, most of the funding wasn't allowed to be spent there. Governments were encouraged not to spend on higher education. And so it took quite some time for us to get beyond that and recognize that higher education does have a place. Most of what I was talking about here, when education can, I think is kind of focused on the early years of education, a lot of it. So the initial returns. We're now at a point globally where there's so much education that the difference between 10th grade and 11th grade is not nearly as significant as the difference between first and second. And so most of the time I am looking at the bigger benefits at the bottom, but higher education obviously has a role to play.
Sarah, do you want to come back to it, or should we just cover the last ones as our?
Oh, I couldn't answer that. I'm sorry. That was a great answer.
So maybe just to capture the lovely comment from Elvira, if you can't see it in the back, thank you for the inspiring talk. As a MH alumni, very proud of the contributions you are doing collectively. Thank you, Elvira. And then Born's going to be the last person. Oh, do you want to come in?
Yes,
Okay.
you mean like
Okay, just a second. Well, shall we just take Born and then we'll come to you and that will conclude us. Is that okay? Yeah, okay. So does Born want to speak to us?
yeah, I am born and I graduated from the Master of Education program 2 years ago, and I'm currently studying RPP in University of North Carolina in the US. And I think one thing that kind of, troubling me all the time is when I was trying to share those kind of research and theories with the teachers, I feel like there could be a boundary that I feel like they should know about that, but they shouldn't know about that as, professional researchers. So what could be the real, the boundary or the appropriate level that they understand those things, but not, take so much of their time because they're so busy with their daily work. And then at the same time, they could be able to be critically reflecting on those kind of theories and research. And I think that was basically my question.
Oh, well, thank you for your question and good luck with your PhD. I'm looking forward to reading some of your work. I think in terms of the research practice partnerships that we have, usually what we do is, if, for example, we're involving teachers in a co-design process, we'll share an accessible research summary beforehand. So as I said before, my research is literacy research, and literacy is underpinned by research from lots of different disciplinary perspectives. And so one of the things that I found as a researcher is that I can't just share my own kind of psychological lens of what literacy is, but actually instead I need to be familiar with different disciplinary traditions and exploring literacy. And so I do tend to write quite accessible summaries for teachers that really synthesize that body of research, and I'll do a presentation and talk about it. And we'll have questions and discussion about it. And then I find that that summary is often part of the program or resource that we create. So it's worthwhile putting the time in because it actually underpins the sort of the program or the resource that's going to be shared more widely. And teachers can also give input into it then as well. But I do think it's really difficult for teachers to get meaningfully involved in a research practice partnership unless they have a bit of depth of research knowledge. So I do think we have a responsibility to ensure we do that in a way that's as easy and as accessible as possible.
I just wonder what your thoughts are on the fact there is an absolute blind spot and kind of a blanking of all the research to do with music and the arts and how that benefits every single aspect of a child's development. But politically, there is absolutely a block to that and an unwillingness to read it all. I mean, there are decades and decades of research about that, but it's just shoved to the side because people don't link it with numeracy, literacy, and they go, oh no, we need that, but they don't want, there's not a willingness to look at that and really engage in that and implement. So I'm a professional musician. I also am an alumni of Moray House. So I teach a couple of days a week music, but the rest of my time is performing.
Shall I go first? So, I mean, I think this probably comes back to the point that was made earlier about policy being open to hearing some things and others and certain sort of ideological perspectives, and looking for the pursuit of some research, but not others, and very explicitly looking for some research and not others. And I think sometimes even when we connect things to policy priorities. So what are the priorities in policy at the moment around whether that's sort of health and well-being or inclusion, them looking to other ways to achieve that, as opposed to, for example, you're saying to music education. I have no answers to it, but I know this, like I said, this article that Craig had written about the mechanism for policy advice. He also speaks as a former policy broker about politicians either being ready to hear something or not. And it doesn't matter how much research or how accessible your summary is. It's just that sort of the timing and the messaging just doesn't resonate with what they're interested in. So I personally don't have an answer. I sympathize and I appreciate and I understand that that is an issue for some people who are working in areas where there's just not that same desire to learn about the work.
Yeah. I think to me it speaks, and it's getting, I think, increasingly more difficult in the arts and music and so forth to maintain a living and be seen as still central to the education of our children. And I think a lot of that speaks to the capture of quality and what quality is. And oftentimes, I think as researchers, sometimes we don't do a good enough job advocating, right? So we're trying to see as we're objective, here's the results. Of course, they're going to speak for themselves, but there needs to be somebody to speak for the results sometimes. And we don't do a great job of advocating for a different perspective on quality, for the importance of something. And that includes within our universities, right? Because a lot of, when we think about what programs are staying in the university, it's about the return. And we continue to forget about how important all these other aspects of education are for the well-being and livelihood of us individually and for society. And so I think we do need to not be afraid to have our voice out there. We found the results. Now we need to talk about, well, what is this, why is this important? Why do we need to challenge kind of the higher education as a business model only approach?
Well, I think thank you for that. I think thank you to all the people who have had an engaging discussion and contribution and came online and in the room. So thank you for that. No need, but just to offer our wonderful speakers, is there any last comment you want to make in terms of thinking about the discussion and your talks?
Shall I go first?
Yeah.
I mean, first of all, just thank you all for being here. It's just such a lovely sunny September day. And so thank you all for taking the time to come and join us. I think one of the things, there's just been so many interesting sort of reflections and discussion points. And I think it sort of expanded my thinking about research practice partnerships, maybe beyond the sort of the UK sector more globally. And if anyone wants to follow up for a discussion afterwards, I'd be really interested to hear about some of your experiences too. So just say thank you for joining in person and to those people online as well.
Yeah. For me, when I was invited to give this talk, oftentimes as an academic, you're very critical of context or the fact that, it doesn't actually work in this context, it does work in this context. But hopefully what you're coming away from this is a little bit of optimism on education. I think when we look in the newspaper and we have these conversations, we hear about the learning crisis, we hear about learning poverty, we hear about all these things. If there's a teacher in the news, it's probably a negative report. And so I think as we're starting our 176th year here as a School of Education and Sport, it's important for us to remember why we're here and that there is massive potential in education for the world, really. And that gets me excited. It's why I'm here, and hopefully it's why you're here.
Well, what an inspiring end. Thank you. So, given there's no way I could say it better than those two people, I think just to do the thanks. So I think we've already thanked you all so much, but thank you again for coming today here and online. Thank you to all the people who've been organizing the event, which is always so much work, and the tech and other people who have made it all possible. So I think a big thanks. And a real thanks to our speakers. Could we give a traditional huge clap?